Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
It is such a pleasure to have you on this show, and I've been really looking forward to our conversation. So to our viewers who are listening in, George is an incredible leader. His leadership journey started in Australia and it has taken him across the globe. He's not only a teacher, he's a leader, he's a researcher, and also a former rock band member. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
I'm going to put it in my bio. That's
perfect,
Sorry.
Perfect. So today, George, we're going to be exploring how you stepped into the leadership role and you know the experiences that shaped your path. And I'm sure our listeners today are going to take away so much from your experiences. So I'm going to dive straight in. Take us back to your early days in Australia. What first pulled you towards education?
Well, actually, my earliest days are actually in the UK. I was actually born in London, and just like many people in the late 70s, Margaret Thatcher's conditions were not great for working class people. So we ended up in Australia, my dad being Scottish, my mum being a New Zealander. We settled in Australia. And so that early move where dad's one of seven. So going from lots of cousins to no cousins to having my parents and my two sisters really kind of made me a bit more independent than perhaps I would have been had I grown up around an extended family. And so I really enjoyed education when I went through my primary school. Did not enjoy high school, and it wasn't until I got to university that I started to figure out why. And I guess at the time, the education system didn't really speak to me. And so at first, so I grew up with a very bad speech impediment. And the thing I could imagine not doing in my whole life would be standing in front of a class or 1,000 students or a faculty and talking on a daily basis. It would be the very last thing that I could think of. So I don't actually know how I ended up there, apart from the fact I remember the day when I decided that it was for me. And then from that point, I was all in. I was probably in my late 20s and I was like, yeah, actually, I really like it. And then from there, I was all in.
That's fantastic, George. I had no idea that you were from UK originally, from Scotland as well. How interesting. And was there a moment, or maybe in the classroom or during your leadership opportunity where you thought, yes, this is it, leadership is where I want to be?
I was actually having this conversation with my current head here at Robert College a couple of weeks ago. And we were just kind of talking during our weekly kind of catch-up meeting. And we both realized that we got into it so we could put our money where our mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
I guess everyone who works in the school would meet people who think they can do it better. And very few of them will actually stand up and take that challenge head on. And so our journey into leadership was very similar in that we thought, well, someone's got to do it. It may as well be us. And we basically dove in head first with the idea that someone's got to do it, and we'll do it.
So it seems like your journey into leadership sort of unfolded more organically as opportunities came your way.
Yeah, I guess essentially, like everything kind of links in together. The thing that got rid of my speech impediment was my time in a rock band, because I was given the job of being the singer in that band. So that idea, that experience got rid of my stutter and got me confident in being in a group. So when I present at assembly or I present at a conference in front of 5,000 people,
yeah.
when I present at a conference, no, that's totally fine. I kind of have this rock band persona where I go up on the stage and I'm putting on a show. So that experience kind of galvanized this approach I have to leadership, and the teachers I had who were the people that made the biggest impact on me. They also put on a show, but they were very personal and they were very personable and they were very authentic in their interactions. So that's the kind of approach that I took, that I need to put on a show and I need to share some of myself with the people that I'm working with, I'm leading, I'm collaborating with, so that I can encourage them to essentially take a risk and find a solution and propose an idea, and showing that regardless of what role you have in a school or an organization, you are actually on an equal footing with everyone. Our job titles are different, but our purpose is the same.
That's fantastic. So all the way from Australia to the world, what inspired that first international move?
Yeah, it's my parents moved to Australia and I grew up, my sisters are quite far apart, one older and one younger. So I grew up as like an only child in a way. I'm the only boy. We all went to separate schools. And I'd always kind of had this idea that I liked adventure. I just grew up knowing that my mum and I used to have adventures when I was a kid, walking in the woods in Scotland. And when we moved to Australia, it's a gigantic playground for a child. And so I was really into this idea that my parents were brave and they made the choices to move to another country in the early 80s with a family of children, and just basically threw caution to the wind and took that risk to see what basically happened. And for me, it was the same. I grew up in Australia and I went to school there, and but I'd always been drawn towards non-traditional education. I worked in outdoor education for quite a number of years. I was a pro whitewater kayaker and a guide and mountaineer and a scuba diver and stuff. And I'd worked with students at private schools in Australia for quite a long time. And I always saw a different side to that type of education. So I was kind of inspired by this adventure side of things, and this non-traditional route in my career. And someone significantly more intelligent than me, shout out to Amanda, she had an idea that that international education would be an adventure, and it turns out it was.
It seems like you've had quite an adventure, George. So I can imagine that it must have been a bit of a culture shock, don't you think, moving from Australia to a different country. Do you remember what your first international leadership post felt like?
I actually do. So the first leadership, the first overseas role was in Uzbekistan in Tashkent International School. So it's a Russian-speaking country, post-Soviet Union. You know, there's a mixture of kind of Uzbeks and Russians and the Koreans that came across when kind of North Korea had its movements of people. And so you land there at the old airport and you have literally nothing is familiar. None of the sounds, the sights, the smells, the people. Climbed in a different side of the car behind the driver's seat when I first got there, and everyone thought that was great and I wanted to drive. And so but the one thing that I do have is I had traveled quite a lot, and I traveled quite a lot on my own. And I'm not a very highly strung person, so these things kind of don't stress me. And so it was more of the novelty and the adventure, going to a market bazaar in the first time and trying to haggle for a bar of soap with a person that doesn't speak English, and I didn't speak Russian, I didn't know the money. You know, I ended up buying laundry soap that was like really strong for my body, and I didn't have soap for like a week. And so just getting to know things, it's actually terrible. So it's more of an adventure, not knowing what food is good to eat. So you end up just eating cheese on toast for like 3 months until you find something that's kind of good.
No way.
So it's really more of an adventure, meeting whole new people. And so incidentally, that was my first international leadership role as well. I came in as a grade level leader in an international school. And so I basically landed, and now I'm in charge of a team, many of whom had been there for, 5 to 10 years or so. So, and that's really been the kind of story of it. I've never been frightened to bite off. anything because it'll either taste great or it'll choke me. So so far, everything's been kind of tasty.
So in your first international leadership role, were you teaching? What subjects did you teach? What was your role like? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I went into an IB school, International Baccalaureate School, having done about 2 days of training in the IB, and I went in to teach. At the time, it was called social science or humanities, and then it became individuals and societies. And so I was the grade level leader for grade 9, planning trips all around the country and running a whole bunch of activities there, teaching a new course that I had no idea about and subject matter that I hadn't engaged with for the better part of 10 years. And it soon became apparent to me that my key role in schools was to lead change. That was the thing I was very comfortable with. That was the processes that I was probably the best at. And so that subsequently became the blueprint of all of my leadership roles from that point forward, to build change from the ground up.
Change is a fantastic thing, but there are, some people who are uncomfortable with change. So when you land in a new school, a new country, and you have to sort of deal with a new language, how do you, as a leader, approach leadership and in a way that it sort of feels authentic to you, but also sort of respectful to the local culture?
Yeah, so the really change and understanding organizations is really about building relationships. And so seek first to listen. And so that's really the way that I always go about things. Try and, authentically connect with people, find their interests, find what motivates them, find some experiences at the school, even things like getting restaurant tips, or there's an activity, something on the weekend, should we join it? So it's really about connecting with people. And through that connection, you kind of find out the things that they think are really important and the areas that they would like to be changed. And they might even have some suggestions that are contextually relevant. And so the easy way to do it is gently at the first, build up some social capital. And from there, you can start to shape change. Within an organization, there are people who are resistant to change and people who are more eager to change. And part of the system of making change in an organization is to identify the people who are really eager to make changes and use them within the group to kind of drive that change, to give ownership to the team. And so there's basically ways to identify people within that bigger system, and some strategies that you can do to create positivity around change. Many people are resistant to change because they think what's being said is the things that they've done before aren't good enough. And that's never the case. So it's always a matter of taking away this idea that change is a threat and that it's more of a shared journey towards a goal.
Yeah, that is, so true. To be an effective leader, you have to be adaptable. You need to embrace change, don't you? I remember,
Absolutely.
George, when you and I, when I sort of met you for the very first time, you were a deputy at Trident College in Zambia.
Yep, absolutely.
Tell us a bit about that. How did you find your time in Zambia, and what was your role there in that? It was a secondary school, a boarding school, wasn't it?
Yeah. So most of the all of the international schools I work with are private, and that kind of tends to be a pattern globally. That they tend to be fee-paying schools. Sometimes they're like associated with an embassy, such as the one in Uzbekistan, and sometimes they kind of aim towards a certain social group. If you go back to the early origins of international schools, they're really set up for expatriate families who are studying overseas, doing courses like the IB or the IGCSE or A-levels that give them this kind of social capital. Over the last 10 or 15 years, most seats in international schools are actually taken up by local students. So, and so it's very much like aspirational. parents who probably were educated and can see that that is a pathway for their children to get the best opportunities either locally or internationally. So Trident College is in my opinion, it's the best school in Zambia. With part of the mission of many of these schools is to, I guess, equalize society through opportunity. And so that school runs a very big full scholarship program, really well supported by the mine, the Kinsenchi mine, FQM, First Quantum, runs one of the biggest copper mines in the world. And as a part of their social outreach, they provide scholarships. So you've kind of got this school where you've got the elite of society, you've got people who, would otherwise not be able to afford the school, and a very aspirational group of students and parents who, and anyone that's ever traveled to sub-Saharan Africa or Southern Africa will probably had an experience like me of the friendliest people, the most welcoming people, great sense of humor. And so that's really what it was like for me from day one with all of my team and my students, and I share.
Thank you for saying that,
ideas.
George.
Yeah.
Because I'm from Africa myself. So yes, I'll take that as a compliment.
No, amazing. And so it's I think one of the best parts about teaching internationally is actually the cultural experience. I've had opportunities to do things that when I was growing up in Scotland and I'm living in a council house, going to a government school and it's snowing and I'm just no, I had no concept that the world like this was out there. And so I basically landed in Zambia in the middle of COVID. I landed at the airport and my first job was to get the school open with the government through COVID. We'd had a number of families had lost some family members to COVID over the years, and you're working in a developing country, and I managed to do that. And from there, we just got bigger and better and stronger over my time there. It was an amazing experience. A lot of great friends are there. I actually run a couple of businesses there, and so it's unbelievable. If you've never had an African sunrise across the Great Plateau, you must. It's one of the most amazing sights.
Of course it is. Of course it is. All right, I think we're going to pause here for just a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after a short news break with more from Dr. George Scorgie.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio News, read by John Gibbs. For Friday, the 18th of April, 2025. This week, two perennial struggles are taking place, both identified for the Times educational supplement. The first, as many teachers will recognise, is the struggle to keep arts significant in the curriculum. Reporter Sam Eyre describes how the significance of arts and the struggle to keep it in the curriculum is becoming more significant under pressure from English and maths. This, as many teachers will know, is that debate between the hard subjects and the soft subjects, which continues. Also in the Times Education magazine, Charlotte Cooper asks schools not to respond too quickly to moral panics, such as the ones that might be in response to the programme on television Adolescence, brilliant though it was. It pushes aside many other things that have to be accomplished in PSHE and demands again of schools that they should solve the problems of society. This time in The Guardian, a letter from Councillor Johnny Cranshaw, who describes the way in which multi-academy trusts are actually much more expensive and leech away millions in the salaries of executives and ancillary staff. His letter, right or wrong, continues the ongoing debate and re-evaluation in this country of the value and success of the multi-academy trust experiment. Also related to some of the perennial problems and questions that many people ask about schools was a thought-provoking article in The Guardian this week by Eva Wiseman. She asks, there certainly is a problem with attendance in schools at the moment. After the pandemic, it's really gone down significantly. Everyone agrees that this is the case. But should we be asking, what are schools for? Is this a symptom rather than a problem in itself? Is the problem something underlying, something that looks us in the face? Are these the schools, she asked, that Michael Gove built? Schools where the discourse is about delinquency, feckless parents, lazy students, and discipline. Should we be asking instead how we can make schools more receptive, more comfortable, more humane for students of all kinds? Again, right or wrong, these may be things that we should certainly be asking ourselves. Sky News picked up on the Andrew Tate phenomena. Misogyny. Young boys as young as 10 barking at female teachers, blocking doorways, and so forth. Is this part of the moral panic? Is it real? Or is something very significant happening in our society that's generating a toxic masculinity that we should all be aware of? In support of the suggestion that this is a very significant problem, more than 5,800 teachers were polled as part of a survey by the NASUWT union. And nearly 59% said they believed that the use of social media had contributed to a deterioration in pupil behaviour. Returning to the theme this week of perennial questions, ones that any teacher with a lengthy career will recognise, was the online site Teacherhead, which asked, does subject knowledge matter more than teaching techniques? Is it important that a teacher should be an expert in their field? Their knowledge impress the students, the depth and understanding of their particular field? Or is the art of teaching something that relates to relationships with students, techniques in the classroom, structure of lessons and planning? Can brilliant people be poor teachers? Can brilliant teachers not know much about their subject? Well, as for perennial questions, I'm sure that question will go on. And finally, a major story in the news this week, covered in The Independent and by the BBC, are free school breakfast clubs. They provide 30 minutes of morning childcare and a breakfast, and the trial is taking place in 750 schools until July. This was an election promise by the Labour Party and is being carried through by the government. Critics wonder whether it's being properly funded, with many schools suggesting that the costs will fall on them. It is generally agreed, however, that a good start and a breakfast and a period of time where students can begin their day before the pressures of school starts is probably a good thing. In the 1960s, we were urged to go to work on an egg. Not such a bad idea. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs.
Welcome back to The Late Show. I'm here with Dr. Scorgie, and we've been hearing all about his journey into education and the international platform. So, George, you have led in so many places. What would you say are the core qualities that stay consistent in strong school leaders, no matter where you are in the world?
I think there's an interesting tension. For example, I've had this conversation quite a lot, and people, the classic example for why perhaps some schools don't have as much accountability perhaps as they should have is that the answer that people give is schools are about people, and that's 100% true. But there's other businesses and industries that are more about people. Hospitals are more about people than schools because it's literally life and death. Airports and hotels are more about people, and all of those industries are very systematized, and all of those industries work to standards, and there's a degree of management in leadership as much as there is vision. And so I think all the great leaders I've worked for and have modeled myself after, particularly as my key thing why a school would hire me is for change, is really about systems. It's really about systems that work for people. It's really about accountability. And the one assumption I make about every single person in the school is that they all want the same thing, and that's the best outcomes for students. And so from that assumption, I always basically extend people the courtesy and the respect of, if they say they need a day off, I don't question it. I just give them that time off. If they say they need something, I try my hardest to give it to them because it makes their life better with the work sense, and it makes outcomes for students better in that sense. So systems have to be strong, but the tension between systems is the needs of people. So really good leaders, they toe that line. They build systems, they build structures, they build accountability, and they build rigor. But they also build an understanding workplace that really realizes that teachers are, like, if I don't go to school tomorrow, my office will still run effectively with the people I have in that office. So leaders should be able to be superfluous. They should be able to build a system where they don't even need to be there because they've empowered everybody else. And so that's one of the fundamentals that I do. I include people in, key conversations that have expertise that maybe aren't even in a formal leadership role. But if they're an expert in something, then it's my duty to find out what they know so I can provide the best outcomes. So really, it's about the best leaders are people. That doesn't make sense, but they're also system thinkers. Yeah, they're also system thinkers.
You're absolutely right. Some of the finest leaders that I have worked with are leaders who know how to work with people, who know how to collaborate, who lead with understanding and empathy. And of course, you need to have accountability, like you just said. So yeah, that's great. But I'm sure you've had, challenges along the way. Is there something or a challenge that has really shaped the way you lead today?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is reshaping a culture. And in many cultures, so if anyone's familiar with the work of someone like Hofstadter's Cultural Dimensions, and there's an element of culture power distance relationship in the UK, for example, and in places like Australia and America, there's not a great power distance relationship. People like newspapers will poke fun at leaders, and so that social structure in terms of the gap between people at the top and people at the bottom is maybe not as big as it is in many other countries in the world, particularly developing countries or traditional patriarchal countries. And so the challenges of cultural change, they tend to come in those arenas where you're trying to move the needle some way, but there is resistance to change that becomes personal. And so, you've got to deal with this kind of social politics fallout, these micro political climates that you have to navigate, where people will speak behind your back and they'll get support of this person, or they'll call another person, or they'll call a board of directors type of thing. And so you've just got to navigate those, and you've got to do it in such a way that you don't show any of your emotions. As well as in a band and well as being a mountain climber, I've also a martial artist, and I trained for a number of years in the Middle East and competed in submission wrestling. And one of my old coaches said, you can never show someone when you're about to go unconscious. You have to play dead face. And so I use that. I use that thing. Someone's like choking you or pulling your arm out of the socket, and your face shows nothing, and then often that makes them question. And so you have to put your emotions to one side, and you have to play a dead face when you're dealing with a particularly fraught conflict in a social scenario. And so it really comes back down to being a little bit of an act at the end of the day, that you have to maintain this and be cool-headed. Otherwise you lose your social credibility, and you basically lose the room.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being in a leadership role, having a level head and being, cool-headed, and the way you deal with people really has an impact on your leadership skills and the way you lead a school. So if you were to bring a young George from Australia fresh into his career and show him the George of today, since you've had this incredible journey, what do you think he'd say?
Well, I was actually talking about this very question with a friend of mine who's actually from Scotland, and he works here with me. And he said in the Scottish accent, young George would say, old George is a bit thicker and has less hair. And he'd be right.
So
I
funny.
think, it's a little true. I think what he would say is he'd say, "Well played." You've done well, and we'd basically say, "Well, who knew that the journey would take like a trip through Central Asia, through China, through UAE, through Zambia, now to Istanbul, and dozens and dozens of countries in between. It would take in a master's and a PhD, and I think that guy would be pretty happy that this was his future."
You have been continent hopping. That is absolutely incredible. So now that you've mentioned your PhD, let's talk about your research. Your PhD explores the changing nature of international education. So what made you dive into this topic?
So a lot of the world and a lot of opportunity is about timing. And so I finished my master's in educational leadership, and there was an opportunity to take a year off, basically, and I was living in China. And so, and a new school, I was working at a new school. And so when you push cultures together, for example, a Chinese national culture and an international culture, I was very interested to see what would emerge, how it would emerge, what would be the tension points linguistically, culturally, socially, practically, when you've got a teaching staff made up of a number of people from all over the world, some who've had international experience, some who haven't. You have Chinese national teachers who'd had international experience, some who hadn't, leaders that had, and some who hadn't. And so it was really just an opportunity to spend a year in the field, taking a couple of 100,000 words worth of notes as to how the culture was forming, how leadership, how language use was prioritized, and so from that grew my questions around international school leadership, culture building, and bilingual education. And the rest is history.
Wow, that's fantastic. And now that you've done the research, how do you see it playing out in real life? Has it sort of, shifted the way you lead or think about your role?
Absolutely. My big focus has changed, and my skill set lie in change. And when you look at a school, it tends to be able to be broken up into 4 discrete areas, like the school professional culture, like what it looks like in the classroom, how we teach, how we assess, the school kind of social cultural arena, like how we interact outside the classroom, what language we use. There's the professional practice arena, like how we see the school, what is the school's mission. For example, a fundamental question when you go to an international school, say in a foreign country, is, well, are we an international school in this country, or are we a national school with an international program? And so that really that kind of starts the ball rolling to say, well, okay, what does culture look like? And so the last of the 4 like arenas is if you're a residential school, you would include the residential program there, but the outside school like arena, the kind of social outside of the school. So you got these 4 key areas or places where you can make cultural change, and within those 4 areas, there's a bunch of behaviors that you can do to influence how people act and how people think in those areas, and that added together can create cultural change, usually pretty short, over a couple of years. You can see meaningful cultural change. And so I use that roadmap. And people who want to see that, on page 183 of my thesis that you can download, gives me a download credit, makes me look awesome. So yeah, and so you can go to the roadmap and you can see a whole list of things. For example, if I was to say the school professional practice arena, explicit values and expectations, empowering middle leaders, shared professional practices that people are held accountable to, support systems like their technology use, the office system, the payroll, all of those systems aligned with the school mission, student management aligned with the school vision, administrative systems that align with it, and teacher growth and support that aligns with the school mission. And you just have to basically unpick the culture into a little pattern, and you can see where changes can be made. And once you start making changes, you see the cultural change. So I use that roadmap all of the time.
Sounds very interesting, George. And I think I will be downloading your thesis. Sounds like it's going to be an interesting read.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a pretty handy doorstop. And I think there's about 40 pages of references. The best parts are from about 187 onwards. So, yeah.
Perfect. 187 onwards. I have, noted that down. So tell us about your current role. You are currently working in Roberts College in Turkey. So tell us a bit about your current role in the college.
So Robert College is an interesting school. It's very different from schools I've worked at in the past. It's very old. It's 161 years old. So it predates the formation of modern Turkey, started in the Ottoman times. It's gone through many kind of guises. And so my role here is the Dean of Student Activities. So I have an office of people, and we essentially run all of the systems in the school. I still teach economics, but we run like systems and trips, and we've actually got some people like that robotics thing that they were talking about. It was last week. And so so I basically build systems for 1,000 students and 300 teachers and staff that cover things like student activities, residential life programs. We handle the logistics for large events, and so we kind of do like scheduling, calendars, processes, systems. So that's kind of like would be the core of the job at the moment. And one of the key things is obviously in line with my skill set and why people hire me is creating change. So really, this is my first year here. It's almost finished, and it's really been about systematizing things and finding ways to create new opportunities. So
how exciting! It sounds very interesting. Now, I can't go any further without asking you about the rock band. What was that chapter of your life like, and what was the name of the rock band?
Well,
and how old were you when you joined the rock band?
Well, probably like many people who came of age in the 90s, it was an era of great music. You had Pearl Jam, probably my favorite band, alongside Led Zeppelin. And you had all this kind of social social upheaval. And I guess I kind of didn't know then that I had an interest in culture, but I knew that I liked music, and I knew that I liked a sense of belonging to a larger group. I guess if I wasn't a researcher, I would be an anthropologist. And so, and I wanted to make, yeah. And so the first time I heard an overdriven guitar, you know, grungy guitar, and I heard Kurt Cobain yelling into a microphone, and, you know, I was like, I want to make those noises. That's the noise that I want to make. And so, you know, I learned to play the guitar badly, learned to sing pretty badly. And then the rest is history. So we went through many names in the band, but we couldn't really think of one. So we ended up being called Porcelain Bus Driver, which probably isn't the best name. We did a few hundred shows, did some albums. And so one of the things that did is, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of fixed my speech impediment, and it gave me the confidence to stand up in front of any size number of people and put on a show. And so it was great. And do I still do it? Yes. My guitar's all set up in my lounge room, and you know, I walk past and I'm like, yeah, when I had hair, I used to rock pretty hard. But it's an amazing experience. If you've never been in a band and done a live show in front of a crowd, it's there's nothing like it. It's nerve-wracking, exhilarating, and usually I can't wait for it to be finished so I can have no stress. But it's amazing.
I bet it is. It just sounds really exciting.
Noisy and smelly.
Noisy, yeah, definitely noisy. And I can just, you know, imagine seeing you jamming on stage.
Hi, secondary school teachers. We're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
You've recently done, a concert.
Yeah, so
something along those lines.
I do. I've got this thing where I try and be in a band in every continent that I'm in. So in Uzbekistan,
No way.
It's a bit of a thing. So I was in a band in China called the Party Line. Of course, we played just a bunch of covers at local bars, and I was in a band in Abu Dhabi. COVID kind of killed that, and so we had some shows and had some fun there. I was in a band in Uzbekistan, but that was mostly to do, and I hate to say this, the score of musical plays for actors. So I'm going to count that. I'm definitely going to count that. In Zambia, I used to just rock out with a couple of bands that would come through the school, and I would just, or they'd come to some events and I would play. And obviously I'm a bit of a karaoke champion. And so I still play, and I jam with a few people here every now and again, and we'll see what comes of it. But I've been roped into playing a Limp Bizkit song next year. We have a massive music culture at the school, and we have a like a
Yeah.
one-day live event. And so I've been roped into playing a couple of heavy tracks next year. So that'll be interesting.
That's great. I can see this link between your creative musical side and your leadership skills. Just like you said, being up on stage and being a leader perhaps has given you the ability to read a room and things like that when you're in that leadership role. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you do become a bit of a different character. Like, I wear a tweed suit to school every day, and when I put that on, I'm a different person. There's some things that I don't say, and some things that I, do say, and times where I bite my tongue. Where if I was outside, I probably wouldn't, and so it does give you the ability to change into a different person needed, as needed. And that can be in any social scenario, whether I'm driving across Zambia with a team of rugby players or, whether I'm in Beijing playing in a show in a bar in downtown, near. So it's really just about being able to kind of observe and adapt, really. And I find that's a great way to get to know people too, meet them on their own terms.
So you're a rock star and a brilliant leader. Do you have like a personal mantra or a habit that helps you stay grounded through, the busyness of leadership?
I do. And the older I get and the more experienced I get, the better I get at drawing a line between what's work and what's me. And so when I'm at home, I make that my personal space, and I try not to bring work home, and I try to make my space a bit of a sanctuary, where I don't have noise and I don't have distraction, and I can do things on my own time and on my own terms. And I find that that's a way to recharge. And, I go out we have a little group of people here who goes out to, say, a Korean barbecue once a week. And it's just a way to be off campus and, feel like you have a life outside of work. And I think if you don't have that, you'll be consumed by your work and you will become your work. And that's bad for a number of reasons for your health, but it also means you don't have the objectiveness that you perhaps need to make a tough choice or a hard call or to have a tough conversation. So it's a little bit about making space.
I absolutely agree. I think as a leader, you need to look after your mental health and your well-being, and that is really important. So for those listening and who are thinking about leadership or working abroad, what advice would you pass on?
I would say if you are interested in working abroad, it's probably the best thing that you'll ever do. For example, the things that would probably bother you or you spend most of your time thinking about in the UK or wherever you are in the world, things like paying for rent or paying for healthcare or education for your children. When you move internationally, those things usually vanish as a matter of fact. You either get a house and what you find is when those weights are lifted off you, you have more freedom to do things. You have more mental space. And so you tend to have more financial rewards. You tend to have more opportunities for adventure. But like anything, there's a trade-off. And so you will become a different person when you leave. And when you come back, you won't fit in. And everything else will have moved on past you, including your friends and many of your family. And you won't have experiences that they can relate to. You don't watch the same TV shows. And so for longevity, you can't live in two places at once. If you move to China, you live in China. You make new friends in China. Your social life becomes China, and you keep in contact with maybe your close friends and your family, but you can't be in two places at once. And that means that there is a trade-off. You miss out. You feel like you miss out on some things if those things are important to you, like connection at the local football team, a running club that you might have. Those things go, and so you become a different person, and you can't fit back in, and that's great because it really just means that you've evolved, and so I would say it's amazing, and I would say if you are thinking about it, there's the things that you would say in your mind are reasons why you can't do it. They're basically excuses. And
Yeah.
if you really want to do it, you just basically do it. And it's usually pretty easy to get a job, and then off you go. And so I would say do it.
That's great advice. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'd say move internationally earlier. Get an extra 10 years in there, buddy.
Really?
Yeah, do it earlier. I mean, like my parents moved across the world, so I really didn't have a connection to somewhere. I basically was maybe subliminally programmed to move overseas, and so I don't keep a lot of stuff. Got a very sparse. I've got my guitars and my things that I need, and then I put it all into a suitcase. I got 4 suitcases here, and then off I go to the next country.
That's incredible. So, all right, George, we are going to wrap things up with a quick fire round. So just think what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Really? It's tea for me. Anyway, favorite country you've worked in and why?
That's like choosing between your children, so I can't do that. Every country I've worked in has something amazing. You all have a favorite child, I know you do, but we can't say that publicly, so we'll have to pass on that one.
Oh, come on. You have to give me your favorite country. You have to make a choice.
I can't do that, but let's say I can't do that. That would be, I wouldn't be welcome anywhere.
I'll let you off the hook. Most used leadership phrase or saying?
It is what it is.
It is what it is. I like that one. A leadership quality you admire in others?
I would say staying the course and being prepared and being, there's a very tough one too, but I would say a creative problem solving, looking for solutions.
Looking for solutions, I like that. Favorite rock band from your performing days?
Pearl Jam.
Of course, I knew. A song you love performing or one that still takes you back?
I would say the second song of Pearl Jam's second album, which would be Animal, or the third song, Daughter. It takes me back to when I had hair and a six-pack and was rocking out hard. Or Led Zeppelin, Ramble On, an amazing song.
Yeah, that's a good one. What's next on your bucket list, personal or professional?
Oh, I'm just relaunching my fashion brand in Tanzania, and so that's going to come online. Holo Couture, shout out to my design team that are in Dar es Salaam doing that right now, and getting my coffee farm fully producing in Zambia. Shout out to Deborah, my buddy, and my business partner there. And so I would say a bit of both.
So you've added being a fashion designer to that list. So a teacher, a leader, researcher, and now a fashion designer. Incredible.
And a farmer. And incidentally, the name George means farmer. It means farmer.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So here I am, full circle.
So you're a farmer too.
Exactly. Full circle.
Well, thank you, George, so much for being here tonight. I enjoyed listening to your journey, your honesty, and yes, your rock and roll past. It has made a rich conversation. We've, got over our technical glitches, and I really enjoyed talking to you. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in onto The Late Show on Teachers Talk Radio. Don't forget to catch up on this episode and others on Podbean or wherever you get your podcast. Take care and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. George. I hope I get to come back.
Of course you will. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.